Necrophosis Full Consciousness drops players into a dark and disturbing world where you wake up inside a broken body with no memory of who you are and how you got there. Everything around you feels unsettling, strange, and intentionally uncomfortable as the game pulls you through rotten environments that feel like an atmosphere brought to life. This is a psychological horror experience that focuses more on atmosphere, exploration, and puzzle solving than action or traditional storytelling. The game relies heavily on symbolism, confusion, and a constant feeling of dread to build its world. While the atmosphere is strong and memorable, the slow pacing, limited gameplay, variety, and confusing story may not work for everyone. The storytelling in Necrophosis Full Consciousness is very abstract and does not hold your hand. You play as a fragmented consciousness that's trapped inside of a decaying body with no memory of your past. From the very beginning, the game creates a feeling of confusion, isolation, and fear. As you move through the world, you start finding small pieces of information about what happened to this place and who you might actually be. The story mostly is told through environmental details, symbols, strange writings, and poetic text scattered throughout the game. The world itself feels like a representation of a broken mind. Every area looks different, but they all share the same feeling of decay, suffering, and death. Some areas feel like ancient temples, while others look like distorted flesh or collapsing realities. The game does not give clear answers very often. Instead, it leaves many things open for interpretation. Some players may enjoy trying to figure out the meaning behind everything, while others may find the story too confusing or too vague to fully connect with. The Subconsciousness DLC expands the story even further by adding new areas, new creatures, and even more psychological themes. It pushes deeper into the idea of mental collapse or existent horror. Overall, the story is clearly made for players who enjoy deep symbolism or atmospheric storytelling, rather than a traditional narrative with direct explanation. The presentation of Necrophosis Full Consciousness is easily one of the most disturbing parts of the entire experience. The visuals are dark, gross, and sometimes hard to look at. The game is filled with decaying structures, twisted creatures, and nightmare-like environments that constantly makes you feel uncomfortable. Everything looks like it's rotting or falling apart. The art style clearly takes inspiration from extreme horror games and dark fantasy artwork that developers wanted this world to feel unnatural and unsettling, and they definitely succeed in that. However, the game can sometimes feel too dark visually. There are moments where everything starts to look too similar, which can make more areas feel repetitive after a while. The sound design is actually one of the strongest parts of the game. You hear distant whispers, echoes, strange noises, and low, crazy sounds that constantly builds tension. Even when nothing is happening, the audio makes you feel like something bad is about to happen. The music is very minimal. Most of the time, the game relies more on silence and silent sounds and crazy sounds than actual music tracks. This helps create a feeling of loneliness and isolation. On Xbox Series X, the game runs at mostly stable 60 frames per second. Performance is generally smooth during the exploration, although some small visual issues and clunky animations can still show up from time to time. Overall, the presentation does a great job of building atmosphere, but its extreme horror style definitely won't appeal to everyone. The gameplay in Necrophosis Full Consciousness is very different from most horror games. There are no real weapons, no fast-paced action, and very little traditional combat. Instead, the game focuses on exploration, puzzle solving, and interacting with the environment. Most of the time is spent walking through disturbing areas, solving strange puzzles, and trying to understand how the world works. The game often makes you feel like you're inside someone else's nightmare. One of the main mechanics involves separating your consciousness from your body to interact with objects or solving puzzles in different ways. Some puzzles require you to possess other forms or use certain objects to move forward. The puzzles themselves can be very abstract. Sometimes they're interesting and creative, but other times they can feel confusing because the game doesn't always explain what you're supposed to do. The game also moves at a very slow pace. This helps build atmosphere, but it can also make the experience feel dragged out during longer play sessions. There isn't a lot of gameplay variety either. After a few hours, you start to realize that most of the experience follows the same loop of walking, exploring, and basically just solving puzzles. The subconscious DLC adds more content like new areas and even stranger puzzles, but it still follows the same core design philosophy as the main game. Overall, the gameplay feels more like an interactive horror experience than a traditional video game. One of the biggest problems with Necrophosis Full Consciousness is the movement and controls. At times they feel slow, stiff, and a little unresponsive, which can make simple actions feel more frustrating than they should. The game's extreme horror style can also be too much for some players. Everything is dark, bleak, and disturbing almost all the time, and there are very few moments that gives you a break from that heavy atmosphere. The story can also feel too confusing, while the symbolism and mystery are clearly intentional. There were times where it felt more frustrating than interesting because the game gives very few clear answers. The slow pacing also hurts the experience at times. Some sections feel like they go on way too long without enough new ideas or gameplay changes to keep things fresh. Combined with the limited gameplay variety, the experience can start to feel repetitive after a while. Necrophosis Full Consciousness is a very dark and unsettling horror experience that puts atmosphere and symbolism above everything else. The game does a great job of creating a disturbing world filled with fear, decay, and psychological horror. The sound designs and visual style helps create a unique experience that definitely stands out. However, the slow gameplay, clunky controls, and confusing storytelling makes it harder to recommend to everyone. For that, I'm giving Necrophosis Full Consciousness a 2 out of 5. Thank you for tuning in to the best place for independent gaming journalism, the Gamer Section. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay locked in for more reviews, interviews, and gaming content coming soon.